Pope Benedict, in his own right, would be up there amongst the 3 or 4 greatest theologian popes, the greatest thinker, teacher popes in the whole 2,000 years of the Church's history, up there with Gregory the Great and Leo the Great. He clearly was one of the greatest thinkers that has ever sat in the chair of St. Peter, and he brought that wonderful understanding of the Catholic faith. He brought with that an ability to articulate it. He was a teacher. I think it's very common to underestimate Pope Benedict, and that's partly because he followed such a great pope. Pope John Paul was, possibly the biggest figure amongst the papacy of the last 1,000 years. And so to follow after him, you're almost inevitably going to be underestimated. I think it's true that many young people here in Australia only ever knew Pope Benedict and now Pope Francis. And so for them, there'll be a particular grief in the loss of Pope Benedict. Also because many of them perhaps discovered their faith or deepened their faith while at World Youth Day here in Sydney or in the subsequent World Youth Days. He has a very special place in their hearts. He was the Pope who canonised Mary MacKillop. So he had another connection with young Australians and Australians more generally. And therefore I think there'll be a special kind of grief that this man who clearly loved our country, loved being with us, loved contributing to the faith life of this country, is now lost to us. I think his giving Australia its first saint was a very important gift to this country because it tells us that Australians can be saints. This is not something just for ancient times or for faraway places. It's for us here in this land right now. Each time Pope Benedict showed us there was a Christian wisdom to offer on these things, to be offered with humility and with love. He was the gentlest of men. I found this in my several meetings with him. He was constantly trying to reconcile people and so to give them the best arguments so they could think it through for themselves, to listen patiently and converse patiently with people. When you consider that the man was at retirement age when he was elected Pope, he went to Rome expecting to pack up everything and take it home to Germany for retirement, and instead he's elected Pope. He just abandoned himself to the will of the conclave and to the will of Christ at this point in his life, and he was going to do his best. And sometimes that would mean he would be misunderstood or that it could cause controversy in some quarters. At other times he'd be loved, as you saw here in Australia when he came to be the grandfather for 500,000 young people. He got both during his time as Pope. But in the end, what mattered to him was being faithful to Jesus Christ and to be loving towards Christ's people. And that he did in spades. We can know with absolute certainty this was a man without ambition, except in the sense of an ambition to serve Christ and to serve Christ's people, and that he would have come to a point where he thought he couldn't do that adequately and had to hand over to somebody else. And I think God made of him a truly great Pope, a Pope that will be remembered in history as a doctor of the Church, as one of the great teacher popes in our history. And it was lovely that he had happy memories of his time with us in Australia, which I think of the World Youth Days that he attended. It's the one that stood out for him, and that includes one in his own homeland before ours. I think he enjoyed it most. I think he had a rapport with the crowds of young people here that he perhaps was greater than anywhere else he experienced. But for whatever reason, he loved the boatcade, his coming into Sydney Harbour as his way in. Those things were great memories for him, and it's a lovely thing to know we gave him some happy memories here in Australia, that he gave so much to us and to the world, to humanity, that we gave him some happiness in his time here in Australia too. But then he started reminiscing about World Youth Day, and at this stage he was very frail. His voice was a tiny voice, but still his mind was very clear, and happily his English is very good. And he started quoting back to me things I had said at the farewell to him at the end of World Youth Day in 2008. Now, how could he remember a thank you speech from World Youth Day more than a decade before, when he would have heard thousands and thousands and thousands of speeches in between? Well, it's just an extraordinary mind. And it was lovely that he had happy memories of his time with us in Australia, which I think of the World Youth Days that he attended. It's the one that stood out for him, and that includes one in his own homeland before ours. I think he enjoyed it most. I think he had a rapport with the crowds of young people here that he perhaps was greater than anywhere else he experienced. But for whatever reason, he loved the boatcade, his coming into Sydney Harbour as his way in. Those things were great memories for him, and it's a lovely thing to know we gave him some happy memories here in Australia, that he gave so much to us and to the world, to humanity, that we gave him some happiness in his time here in Australia too.